there, lovely cats of space-time. It's me, Jules, illustrator of some books. And by some, I mean these. I'm making more and more videos on how to think up, write, illustrate and make your stories into books. And how to get them out into readerland. One of the questions I get all the time is, where do you get your ideas from? So I thought what might be really useful to you is to talk about the books that I have made and tell you a little secret, exactly where I got my ideas from for each book. There may be a few surprises along the way to certain people who didn't know that they had such an impact on my work life. All of my books will be linked below if you want to have a closer look. Hopefully it will remind you to take a closer look at the little things and notice stuff, because sometimes there's a story inside. Let's start at the beginning, because it's a very good place to start, according to Julie Andrews. So when I was at university, I went to study graphic design and illustration, and I was on a course where we were able to take part in something called the Macmillan Children's Book Prize. And for that I wrote a story called Guffy's Great Escape, about a hamster who got stuck up a chimney. But that aside, I moved on because I felt like I'd really found my niche. I really enjoyed doing this, and I met one of my tutors, and when I sat down with him and looked at what he had written, I felt like I had landed on my feet in the right place at the right time, because I discovered that writing children's picture books was exactly what I wanted to do. It meant I could be a little bit irreverent and use my sense of humour in it, but also be able to express myself through artistic techniques and have a lot of fun with the writing. So I moved on after Guffy's Great Escape. I moved on, and my second project there was Vincent and the Vampires, and here is a copy of Vincent and the Vampires, and it's about a vegetarian vampire bat who is scared or hates the sight of blood. So how did I come up with the idea of this? Well, I was thinking about, I needed a character who was kind of funny and could slot into a situation that was opposite to what you'd expect of him. So as a vampire bat, you'd expect, we think of them as being kind of Halloween-y, evil, blood-sucking, but I wanted him to be someone who could strive on his own, because he was a strong character, but he just didn't fit into his own world. So that's where Vincent came from. And he ends up, in the story, he ends up leaving home and going to find somewhere that suits his personality much better. And really part of the inspiration for this book goes back to when I was a child, and one of my favourite books was The Owl Who Was Afraid of the Dark by Jill Tomlinson. So if you haven't seen that story before, look it up. It was really brilliant. It's about an owl called Plop. And then once I'd finished Vincent and the Vampires, and I'll save that story for another day, because it was a very long and convoluted journey from those thoughts in my head to actually having the book in my hands. But I'd written a number of other stories whilst I was at university and the subsequent years. And my second story that was published is Royal Fleas. And this actually is my best seller. I think partly is because it's such a quirky title. But where the ideas came from for that was, well, I guess I wanted to have a central female character that again was quite a strong character and was able to overcome something. And really this story is all about the little girl called Sophie who helps the Queen overcome her canine catastrophe when her dogs get fleas. It was kind of a slightly irreverent story. It had, the normal problems and crises that most families have, but this was in the royal family. I really wanted to incorporate some letter writing into that, because I think that part of the responsibility of writing children's books is about education as well as fun. So I think it's really important that we carry on those skills and show children how to do that. Also, the other interesting thing about this book was that I wrote the text first. Sometimes I think about the pictures first and I write those in my head, and other times the other half of my brain is thinking in words, so the words come out first. Next up was Wally and Bert BFFs. Now this story is about two best friends and why having a best friend is a real tonic on days when just everything goes wrong. And this story, it came to me in sort of two parts. I had the character in my head first, and the one that you probably haven't seen in any of my videos is Wally, and he's a white short-haired chihuahua. But one of the cute things about him is that when he goes for a walk, if he's really happy, he's kind of like all jaunty, and his little, his legs and his bum wiggles, and his tail taps him on the back as he's walking along. But because he's a very unique character, he was never quite sure what it was that was tapping him on the back trying to get his attention. And I noticed this on our dog walks, and I thought, he thinks that his tail is a different thing to the rest of him. So I had this idea for having a character where there was a tail and a body, and they were kind of two separate things really, two separate entities joined together forever. So I had this character in my head, and I knew it was going to make a really good character for a story, but I just couldn't think. At the time, the plot just wouldn't come to me. So it took me a long time. I kind of parked that in the back of my brain, and I wrote some notes about it in one of my journals about this character that I really wanted to bring to life, and waited for the plot to come to me. And sure enough, one day, ka-ching, it just fell into my head, and Wally and Bert BFFs was born. One day I had a visit from my cousin Val, and she may not even remember saying this to me, but she said, have you got any books that are kind of about Christmas or Christmas-timey books? Because, I've got someone I'd really like to send a book to, but I'm looking for a Christmas one. Now, I don't know if she would remember that at all, but that was instrumental for getting my next book up and running. My next book was called Flossybonce, and she is a fairy who helps Father Christmas on Christmas Eve when he's too poorly to deliver all the presents. It was partly to do with that conversation that I had with my cousin, partly to do with the name Flossybonce, which actually is the name that my mum used to call me when I was a little girl. She'd say, come on Flossybonce, get in the car. And I'd always kind of live with that at the back of my mind. And I thought, when I knew that I wanted to become an author, an illustrator, I thought, that's a great name. I need to use that name at some point. So it was there in the back of my head. I had writing a Christmas book as well. And then the other part was when my children were young and having birthday parties in church halls for them, and doing the old pass the parcel game that you do with children, having a big group of people, kids, I think there were about 6 at the time, maybe 7, and I'd of course done the old wrapping up of the parcel, and inside was something, and each layer had a sweetie inside it. You play the music, when the music stops, the person who the parcel lands with, they open it up, and eventually they get down to the very last person who gets the prize. But I told the children we weren't going to be playing Pass the Parcel. I thought of a better game. We were going to be playing Pass the Parsnip. I know! How excited were they to think there might be a parsnip inside? I'll tell you how excited. Not very excited. However, that kind of little joke that I had between me and myself, I thought, now there is a story. So there were these 3 elements to Flossybonce, and they kind of all came together at one amazing meeting point, and Flossybonce was born. And shortly after Flossybonce, when I was doing my rounds with different events, book events and shows and things like that, to promote my book and to hopefully sell some copies to people back in the old days when that's what we used to do pre-COVID. I was doing an event probably about, I'm thinking maybe 8 years ago now, when it was a very miserable, wet day, and there were lots of stalls. Luckily it was an indoor event, but there were lots and lots of stalls, and it was, I think from memory, it was some sort of like a wildlife day or something along those lines, and there were lots of individual little stalls promoting various things, you know, RSPCA, the Wildlife Trusts, all that sort of thing. And I happened to be next door to the Hare Preservation Society, I think they're called, but there was a lot of time to spare. So I was reading their literature on hares, and I remember just thinking, I'd really like to write a story about a hare. And I spent probably about 6 hours there, and that was enough time to come up with this book, The House on Hare Hill. And it really did sort of come to me in a bit of a flash. I wanted to have this story about a little hare who'd given up boxing, because you know how hares box each other during March, you know, the mad March hares and all that sort of thing. She'd given up boxing, she'd taken up yoga, because I like yoga, and so does Small Hare. So Small Hare goes out on a walk, and she has an adventure which kind of shapes the rest of her life. And the other sort of little thing about The House on Hare Hill was it coincided when I was watching a lot of Great British Bake Off. And those were the days when Mary Berry, God bless her heart, used to front the show. So I had a little bit of a nod to lovely Mary Berry in this book as well. And that was kind of where that came from. So that story came from a day of boredom. And I highly recommend boredom for creativity. If you've got kids who are like, oh, I'm so bored, brilliant, bring it on, because that's when they can allow their imagination to run and be free and think up new ideas and just do stuff that is not sort of controlled by anyone. You know, they're not at school, they're not being told, right, now we need to do this. They're not being told by their parents, it's tea time, or it's go and clean your room time. And they're not being told by the screen what they're going to be looking at next. They're being just fueled by imagination. So I really recommend boredom if you're ever looking for new ideas. There was one year when during winter the BBC had a documentary on called, I think from memory it was called The Great British Year, and it was a 4-part documentary, and each one of those episodes showed a different season and the different animals or birds or plants, insects you might see that would be prevalent during that season. And I was really taken by that, and thinking also about how you lay out a picture book where you, generally speaking, have about 12 double-page spreads. A double-page spread is when you've got 2 facing pages. So you've got 12 double-page spreads, and you've got 12 months in the year. So I thought, I think there might be something in this. So I thought I would like to do my own sort of take on, my own equivalent of this documentary. And I wanted to look at what was around me. What things were, say, in January, what birds could you see, what would the weather be like, and particularly thinking not only about the Isle of Wight where I live, but the sort of southern part of Britain, because if you travel really to sort of the northern shores of the British Isles, the weather is very different. They have much colder winters. But down in the south we sometimes get snow, not all the time though. So how are the creatures, you know, what sort of creatures would you see out and about? And also, I was beginning to sort of learn about the different sounds, particularly bird sounds, the different sounds that you might expect, and how do you document that? So if you are somebody who's looking at picture books, maybe up to about the age of 8, how does that particular bird sound? I wanted to put it down phonetically. So I ended up with these double page spreads with 1 month on each of those spreads. and the different animals, birds, plants and insects that you would likely come across, and the sounds they make, so that if you are out and about and you hear that particular sound but you can't see what it is that's making it, then you have half a chance of being able to identify it. When I had finished Nature Calls, I was kind of pondering which sort of book I was going to do next. Back in the days before children, that is to say, not children worldwide, just my children, pre-children days, I had written a story that I had sent out to publishers, and they really liked the book, but they were kind of looking for more of a series, so several stories behind one idea. And a few editors asked me if I could write the outlines for some more for this book. So I'd actually written the text for Bluebell's new school and several other stories with Bluebell as the character, and I still have them, and I still have the intention one day of making some more of these, because she's a great character. She is a witch who wants to go to normal school, so it's kind of like Harry Potter in reverse. I had this idea many years ago, before I knew about Harry Potter. So before you think I'm jumping on the magic bandwagon, I think that this came to me probably, I would think, in about 1996, maybe, something like that, and it had been bubbling away back there where the little sort of author den lives in my brain. So she was a character who was pretty strong, and she wants to go to normal school, and spoiler alert, she does go to normal school. By normal school I mean not magic, not that there's anything normal about most schools. And in this school that she goes to, she comes across a naughty little boy who actually, when I had finished writing it, discovered that he was my favourite character out of this story, and his name is Alfie Spinblast. Again, it was like the character came and then the plot unfolded fairly easily for me. I just sat down in front of my computer and just typed, and it came, because it's quite a funny story. It has a lot of comedy moments in it, and that's what I like writing. And Alfie Spinblast is perfect for putting into a sort of calamitous situation. So Bluebell sort of came, and there is more where that came from. But in the meantime, so that as I say, was pre-child. Now, going back to when my children were quite little, most parents go through that phase with their children where they say, what would you like for tea? What would you like for your dinner tonight? And the children say, I would like, I'm going to have sausages and mash, please. So mummy or daddy makes sausages and mash and puts it on their favourite plate and puts it down in front of them. And they say, I don't like sausages. Or words to that effect. Now, if you are a parent, I'm 99% certain you will have gone through something like this at some point. How infuriating is it? I'll tell you how infuriating it is. You have to write a story about it. Fidget. Now, Fidget is that baby owl who will not eat owl food. And his mummy goes and gets him all the things that she thinks he will like, and he still won't eat his dinner. So I think partly this story was inspired by my experience with my kids when they were very little, and this is my son at the time. My youngest son was probably about 2. Partly that, and also I'm partly thinking about Plop again. Plop, the owl who's afraid of the dark. And I really wanted to draw owls. So sometimes that's also at the back of my stories. I have this kind of selfish illustrator dream where I just kind of want to draw the thing that I feel like drawing, that I want to draw. And You know, one of the things that I definitely am unlikely to draw is monkeys, because I can't draw monkeys. But the things that I really enjoy drawing, you know, those are the characters that I'm going to be putting in my books. The whole time of having children, this is why it's been a real privilege to be able to have children, because before I'd had my kids, although I had ideas about books, I didn't have the experience of every night putting them to bed, reading stories to them, listening to how they interact and communicate with one another, and the sorts of things that they like to play. Because when my youngest son, again, was probably about the same age as when I was going about Fidget, he was playing a game called The Golden Stone, and I never really figured out what it was about. He had his own thing going on there, but he used to say, "Mummy, I'm going to play The Golden Stone, I'll be upstairs," and off he'd go. So I quite liked that as a title, and this has never happened to me before, but I thought I liked that title enough to write a story based on it. So I wrote this, and it's an adventure mystery, and it's actually all text. Let me quickly show you. It's all text. It's 111 pages, and the only picture is on the front cover. It was a proper mid-grade long story with chapters, but I wanted to write my own story behind that title, but be inspired by the title. So what was this Golden Stone? Where had it come from? What was it going to do? Who was going to be involved with it? So all of those things were sort of running through my head. And again, the story just flowed. As soon as I started sitting down at my workspace, I just typed until it was done. And it was quite a long story. It took me quite a while to get it done. The editing side of it was very tricky, but I'm really pleased with the result. It's the longest amount that I've written and have published. I have also had 2 novels that I've written, but they are very much hidden away on my computer, not for public consumption yet. But so the Golden Stone was sort of born through just 3 words. Next out of the Mariner bookmaking machine was Dogstar. Now, the Dogstar, or Sirius as it's also known, is a star in the sky. I know it's not a planet, okay, but this is fiction, and it's a fictional account of how a dog goes missing and dog's best friend goes in search and looks for them on the Dogstar. So I'd started to think about, okay, Dogstar, what is it? What could be on it? How could it relate to dogs? And what, if it was something doggy, what would be on it? And I had this idea about why dogs might go to the Dogstar and how it might be of benefit to them. And once the idea was formed, yet again, it just kind of wrote itself really. And Dogstar is all about best friends, finding one another. And I also had this idea about it being kind of like maybe on stage. So I kind of saw it in 3D as well, as if it was a show. And my husband made me a rocket, and I made some puppets to show this story in real life. I've also got a cast list for the story itself. My dog Maisie takes the main part of Pixie. My friend's dog Indy, the most glamorous wonder pup, takes on the part of Monty, and Fawn Dixon, a very cute French bulldoggy, takes on the part of Sir Henry Puggington. So this is great because, you know, I like dogs. You know, I'm going to put it out there, okay? I like dogs. I like drawing dogs. And this gave me the perfect opportunity to draw as many dogs as I liked. And then last but not least is my book Bloomin Marvellous, and this was a book that I've been wanting to work on really since I did Nature Calls. I wanted to do a sort of citizen science project looking every day at the different birds, animals, plants, the weather, the pollution levels, you know, all sorts of things like that. I wanted to see what was going on every day and document it so that when I was thinking, you know, oh, when did it snow last? I could look back and see. And it was a massive project, I have to say, you know, making sure that I did a drawing every day, and each day it would take about an hour to do the actual piece of art. But anyway, that's where my ideas came for those books. If you'd like further artist tutorials, I have a variety of short courses that will help you. There are real-time sessions looking at painting, drawing and marker pens, among others. And if you're keen on producing your own book, there is a more in-depth course on what you need to know about self-publishing a book with illustrations. And that covers making key decisions, how to make layouts and dummy books, rhythm and pacing, as well as several tutorials on illustrating your book, and a look at the tech. You can either hop over to my website or join me on Patreon for more information. Go on, give it a go! So looking through all these, I realised that it's like the little comments that people make to me, or the sort of funny ideas I have about things, a sort of quite quirky way of looking at the world maybe, and sometimes just really insignificant things like wondering where a word came from. All of those end up having a story attached to them. So when you find yourself wondering what if, or thinking about things in an alternative universe, make a note of that, because there might be a story lurking there. Next week it will be Halloween, so I am going to think up something truly terrifically terrifying to do with you. Until then, I am off to consider why flies are stupid and bees are clever. Until then, nanu nanu!